Hello, and welcome again. Aldsidu, Old Saxon Heathens, Historical Germanic and Scandinavian Heathens. Today we're going to discuss the Pre-Christian Heathen calendar. Now first, let me just state that this is the calendar of the Germanic peoples, which were in Germania, recorded by the Romans. Germanic tribes spoke Germanic languages, and while the Romans, when they started writing about the Germanic tribes in 49 BC, they did not realize that there were neighbors to the north, Scandinavians, who are also Germanic peoples. So Denmark, Sweden, and Norway obviously are also Germanic tribes. They also speak Germanic languages. The Germanic tribes and the Scandinavian tribes, they're all Germanic tribes. They all speak Germanic languages, and they all venerate the Aesir. Old Saxony. So I always try, as an Aldsidu heathen myself, Old Saxon heathen, I always try to remind everyone the Old Saxons lived in northern Germany, just south of Denmark. They venerated the Aesir. The historical evidence of the heathen calendar is extremely strong. We have calendar rods and runic calendar staffs. I have pictures of these in my blog article. Please visit www.aldsidu.com/blog. I will be discussing these today, but this video is really hitting the literary evidence. We have 3 historical heathen calendars that survived, which also match the runic calendar staffs and calendar rods. The 3 heathen calendars that survive are Bede's De Temporum Rationae, chapter 15, which is dated to the exact year 725 AD, which is 500 years older than Snorri. We have the Old Frankish. The Franks were a Germanic tribe in central Germany and Belgium. They venerated the Aesir, and their calendar is written around 830 AD by Einhard in Vita Caroli Magni, chapter 29. We do have the Christianized Icelandic calendar of the mid-10th century, which is 300 years older than Snorri. These are Christianized moon names that changed to a fixed calendar. It left the lunar calendar of historical heathenry. We also have numerous saga passages and numerous passages by Christians and Muslims writing about what they saw. And when all of these are taken together, we can reconstruct 12 moon names, 5 holy days, at very specific dates. So we can reconstruct the historical heathen calendar because it has been left for us. So the historical heathen calendar was in a 19-year cycle, which is a lunisolar cycle. So every 19 years, 7 of the 19 years are going to be leap years with a 13th moon. And 12 of the 19 years are going to be 12 lunar moons in a year. There are 5 holidays with 3 major blots. The 3 major blots are winter nights, which is the start of winter, midwinter, which is Yule, and Sigurblot. And the most attested holy day is Yule. The second, close second, is winter nights. Sigurblot is a distant third, but it is well attested. We have 2 other holy days, which I don't want to call them minor holy days, but they're not the 3 major blots. The Swedes called it Disting. The Saxons had their All Thing in Marklo in Saxony. The Swedes had Alpha Blot, which is only attested in a Swedish poem, but it does correspond to the same time as Bloodmanuth of the Saxons. And when I mean the Saxons here, I do mean the Old Saxons, though the Old English in England did have a blood moon as well. Both the Saxons in Saxony and the Anglo-Frisians in England were slaughtering animals for meat to freeze and taking their hides for winter clothing at this time. Now, Germanic heathens did have exact times for their holy days. They weren't around, they weren't circa. These peoples knew more about the solstices and their exact timing and the moons than the Romans did. They were much better astronomers. I'll get to it shortly, but the Julian calendar was off one day every 100 years, and at times they weren't even keeping the solstice when the solstice actually was. Hence it was corrected with the Gregorian calendar. Germanic heathen tribes did not make that mistake. We have certain words. So Uuihdage is the Old Saxon word for holiday. It comes from the word we, meaning sacred grove. Uuih. The old Scandinavian equivalent is ve, ve. And these were times as heathenry was mainly done outdoors first with bloat, and then indoors in the wine hall or mead hall with sumbel. These were done in sacred groves. And the words here is Aldsidu. Old Saxon has the word Aldsidu, which means old customs, old traditions. And that's what they referred to their own faith. So they believed that they kept old ways, their ancestral ways. Landwissa is the Old Saxon word for foreign peoples, foreign tribes, religion. So, if they took a boat to Roman Gaul and Celts were there, they would say what the Celtic peoples were doing there were landwissa, which is traditions of the people in that land. And the other Germanic words related to the Old Saxon Aldsidu is fornsed, fernsida, fernsidu. And there are various spellings of those, depending if you're in Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, or the English heathens, the Frisians, the Franks, the Alemanni, etc. We have many Germanic tribes. Now, the moons of the year were moons. The word moon and the word month are related. So a manos is a moon, a manoth in Old Saxon, or a manuther in Old Norse is a cycle of the moon. I understand that in today's world, January has nothing to do with the moon, neither does February, March, April, May, June, etc. But historical heathens saw the moon in the sky. There was no arguing with the moon in the sky. It was clear when it was a new crescent. It was clear when it was waxing, which is growing, and waning. We have in the historical heathen sources days of the moon, not days of the week. There is a 7-day week, which was born in Sumerian cultures, 2500 BCE, which passed to the Babylonians, which passed to the people who wrote the Bible, where there's a myth of an all-powerful God that creates the world in 6 days, rests on the 7th. There is no creation myth in Germanic heathen tribes of a 7-day period. So that was a later Christian invention, even though Tyr Day, which is spelled T-Y-R, but that Y is pronounced like a U. And in Old English, Tus is for the god Tur. Wednesday is Woden's dog. Thursday is Dunar's dog. Friday is Freedag, etc. Free being the wife of Odin. Dunar being Thor. Woden being Odin. So these were given in Anglo-Saxon England after the conversion. But again, a 7-day week was introduced to them with Romans and Christianity. Now, Dr. Andreas Nordberg is the world's foremost scholar on Norse holy days. Even when I was in Germany studying with an archaeologist, a heathen archaeologist on location at the site of the historical Irminsul and the site of Dunar's Dunar's Well, which was an Old Saxon site. Dunar's Oak is a site of the Chatty to the south. But at the Irminsul and at Dunar's Well site, where I was with the German and Saxon heathen archaeologist, he explained to me that the scholars in Germany, as well as himself, looked at Dr. Andreas Nordberg and his writings. So he is the world's foremost scholar on this. And he states that the pre-Christian Yule feast occurs on the first full moon after the first new moon following the winter solstice, while the disting took place at the third full moon according to the same method of calculation. So around the time of the solstice, they determined if the following year would have a 13th moon, and hence we have a lunar-solar calendar of 12 or 13 moons. Tacitus in Germania, who wrote at the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, he said that the Germanic tribes assemble on fixed days, either just before the new moon or just after the full moon. This they reckon to be the most auspicious starting point for transacting business. Now, obviously, we can fill in the blanks a little bit. They're doing business around before the new moon, and they're doing business after the full moon, because on new moons and full moons, those are holy times where they're doing, veneration in their sacred groves and giving offerings. And then Tacitus continued, he states, indeed, they do not reckon time by days as we do, but by nights. Their calendar was lunar, in other words, is what he's saying. And the day began with sundown. All their decisions, all their agreements are made in this way. Night is seen as ushering in the day. The Old Saxon Heliand is an Old Saxon poem. It talks about days of the moon, that the moon, each day it does as it does, waning or growing. So it is also done in this world here in Middle Yard. Mankind as a child goes and follows, the old die, but equally the young come, growing old until word, which is fate, also takes away. The old Saxons had word and shapers. The Scandinavians had earther and nornir. They both have the same functions. They spin the webs, the lifespan. So an orlay, the lay of one's life. They cut the thread. Another verb or noun, metode, the measurer, comes from them. They measure the length of one string, and they cut the string when it's time for that, when that individual's orlagwila, their fateful hour, comes, which is the hour of their death. But nonetheless, the moon wanes and grows, and they had days of the moon. And it's very clear when you study the clues in the poems that survived, especially the ones 400 years, like the Old Saxon Heliand is 400 years older than the Eddas and the Sagas. So here's the pre-Christian Swedish calendar of the year 2020. I list 12 moons, but then I start with the first moon of the following year. So Yule Yule moon, is the first moon of the year. Modern Aesir doesn't teach that Yule is also a moon, which is sad because, Yule is mentioned as a moon in De Temporum Rationae by Bede in 725 AD. And, all the runic calendar staffs have a Yule moon as well as a Yule. So the pre-Christian Swedish calendar begins with Yule Manuther, continues with Sun Manuther, sun moon, Distings Tungal, Distings moon or Distings constellation, Goa Manuther, Ein Manuther, Harpa Manuther. And this year it's one of those 7 out of the 19 years where we have a second moon. We have Skurplas Manuther, Heyanir, T Manuther, House Manuther, Gor Manuther, Yulur. I decided to list this one as Yulur, which also means Yule. That's really how they said it in Iceland. So really the first and last moon of the year, if you're looking at it from January through December, like we do in modern times, the winter nights was the Scandinavian New Year. But there were 2 Yule moons. So in our next Yule will be on the full moon of January 28th, 2021. And again, there are 2 Harpa Manuthers because this is one of the 7 of 19 years where we add a 13th moon. The Old Saxon calendar is the same. The difference, though, is the Saxons had different names for their moons. We do have an Old Saxon poem that lists the names of some of the moons. It's called the Essen Necrology, because found in Essen was a manuscript where the moon names were listed in Old Saxon. It's a partial manuscript, so we're missing some of the moon names, but we know for sure the Saxons had Yule Manuth, Suna Manuth, and we also know they had Haleg Manuth and Blood Manuth, and of course there were 2 Yule moons. The other moons here I listed with numerical equivalents because we don't know for sure that they have the same name of the Scandinavian, so I decided to play it safe, like third moon of the year, though most likely that's a Thing moon, a Thing Manuth. But, that is a guess on my part. Fifto Manuth, the 5th moon, Stacy Manuth, 6th moon, etc. Now, the 5 Scandinavian holidays, and really this is the 5 Germanic holidays because all Germanic tribes celebrated these at the same time. We have the 3 major blots, winter nights, which is on the full moon of Haust Manuther. Haust Manuther means harvest moon. And we're going to see shortly that winter nights is also called Disablot and Haustblot. So the fact that it's called Haustblot is a good indication that it was on the full moon of Haust Manuther. Just like our second holy day, Yule is on the full moon of Yule Manuther or Yule moon. And Sigurblot would be on the full moon of Goa Manuther, which is Goa moon. So there are a 6 moon period of winter, and halfway in between the full moon of Haust Manuther that begins Winter is the full moon of Yule, which is exactly 3 full moons after the full moon of Hausmanuther, and 3 full moons after the full moon of Hausmanuther, we have the full moon of Goamanuther. The other 2 holidays are Disting by the Swedes and the Thing in Saxony and Marklo, and Alphablot and Blood Moon. Now I'm going to use this Nordberg quote again because, I really need to emphasize that we have a lunisolar calendar. It is not a fixed solar calendar. It does not have days of the week. It is really lunisolar. Remember, our modern word for months comes from the word moon, and this is a lunar cycle. We have 2 Old English moons, Yuli and Yolmanuther. So G in Old English is typically pronounced like a Y. Yule, I want to emphasize the solar idea that's taught in modern Asatru that's not historically accurate. The Chronicle of Thietmar of Merseburg, chapter 17, this is hugely important because Yule is the most important holy day on the Germanic heathen calendar, and it is when the 9-year sacrifice was done. Most people know that Adam of Bremen discusses the 9-year sacrifice at Uppsala, but most people do not seem to know the Chronicle of Merseburg, and I think it's because they don't like this quote, because while it does say the Danes did the same Yule sacrifice every 9 years, it does state that Yule was in January, not on the solstice. And this passage, I'll read it, the Chronicle of Thietmar of Merseburg, circa 1000 AD. I have heard odd stories concerning their ancient midwinter sacrifices or bloats. I will not allow the sidu or custom to be ignored. The middle of that kingdom is called Laderen, which is Lera, Denmark. And in the region of Sealand, all the people gathered every 9 years in January. That is after we celebrated the birth of our Lord, which is Christmas, on the solstice at that time. And there they offered to their gods bloats, sacrifices. Now, I said before that the Roman calendar was not accurate. They got off 1 day every 100 years or so. So in October of 1582, it skipped from October the 4th to October the 15th. So it skipped 11 days. And in the year 1582, they moved the solstice back. In a sense, they moved the calendar forward. I should say backwards. They moved the calendar backwards 4 days so that the solstice was moved from the 25th of December on the Julian calendar to be on the 21st of December on the Gregorian calendar. So they really got off the 11 days that they skipped, plus moving it 4 days backwards. They got off 15 days in 1500 years. So the Julian calendar was replaced by the Gregorian calendar long after the Christianization in 1582. Now, the first of let's discuss the 3 major bloats and the 2 minor, and then we'll close the video. But the first major bloat, which is the bloat of the new year, is Veteranatum. Now, let's discuss Ynglinga Saga from the year 1225. It lists 3 great bloats for the year for the Swedes, which the Norwegians and the other Germanic tribes had as well. But Odin is making this mandatory. Odin established the same law in this land that had been enforced in Asaland. On Winter Day, which is the first day of winter, there should be a bloat for a good year. I said before that winter nights is a bloat for a good year. It is the new year. So the first day of winter is a new year. And also, like the word winter yatalu, which is how it stands for winter number. So if I were to say how many years old I am in any of the old Germanic languages in heathen times, I would say how many winters old I was, because that's when the new year begins. So on winter day, the first day of winter, there'll be a bloat for a good year. And in the middle of winter, i.e. Yule, is a bloat for a good crop. And the third bloat should be on summer day, a victory bloat. Summer day is the first day of summer. And there is no midsummer bloat. There is one mention of midsummer bloat in the sagas, just one. There are lots of winter nights and Yule, etc. The only midsummer bloat mention is it's an anti-reaction to the forced Christianization around them. The people who did not want to be forced to be Christians said, screw this, we're going to do a bloat and not go to Mass. In a midsummer is a time when they're going a Viking, they're going trading and raiding, and the majority of people who didn't go trading and raiding were farmers, so I capitalized farming. Scandinavian peoples, they're busy in the summer growing their food, and when winter comes around, they are more indoors, trying to stay warm, surviving off the animal skins and meat that they've frozen. It's a dark time way up north to survive. And it's dark time also because there's less sunlight. Now, in Iceland, discussed veternatum, or winter nights. In Viga Gloom Saga, chapter 6, at the start of winter, a symbol was prepared and a Dísablót happened in which all were expected to take part. So, again, whether you're looking at Ynglinga Saga, where all are expected to go to Uppsala to do that, all are expected to take part. So it does appear that we have agreed upon dates, and, it's considered not good if you do not, do the sacrifices, the bloats, and symbol to the gods at this time. So in Iceland, it does say, though, there's a Dísablót. So in Iceland, Dísablót accompanies winter nights. But, this first passage in Gísla Saga, Snorri chapter 6, and the beginning of chapter 7, when summer slips away, the first winter night is now at hand. So there was a symbol done and then a bloat. So this is another good example of winter nights, but an even better one from the same saga, starting with chapter 9. Thorgrim meant to have a house bloat on veternatum and a sacrifice to Frey. So, in Norway, while it's called a Dísablót in Iceland, in Norway it's a house bloat, which gives away that it's on the full moon of Haust Manuther. But you do a harvest bloat on winter nights, and you can see that it's clearly right there in the text. So the Angles, though, because I say winter nights or winter full moon, the Angles, the Anglo-Frisian peoples who moved to England from Frisia and northern Francia, they didn't call it winter nights, they called it winter filleth, which is winter full moon. And I'll start reading the quote here. Thus, the moon by which they began their winter season was called winter filleth, a name compounded of the terms for winter and full moon, because from the full moon of that moon, or month, winter was thought to begin. So while the Old English calendar calls this moon winter filleth, the Scandinavians called it Haust Manuther, and that's the moon that House Bloat was done on. This is the moon where the start of winter was thought to begin on, and the full moon is when it was celebrated. I'm putting up Thietmar of Merseburg yet again, but obviously I just want to emphasize that Christmas was on the solstice. December 25th was the solstice on the Julian calendar. So by the mere fact that Thietmar of Merseburg says that Yule was done, midwinter was done in January after the birth of the Lord, which is clearly, because Thietmar of Merseburg is a Christian, and he's Greek Orthodox, so he's actually referring to January the 6th, which is another discussion, but the Greek Orthodox Christ Mass, or Christmas, is on a different day than the Western Church. But nonetheless, so later than January 6th, they're celebrating Yule. Now, I do want to talk briefly about Thori and Thorablot. Thori is an individual named Thori, and there's a moon on the modern Icelandic calendar called Thori. And Thorablot is named after Thori, not Thor, which Dr. Jackson Crawford says correctly in his video on the calendar. Thori did a Yule sacrifice to his father, or a Yule bloat to his father on Yule. And those in Copenhagen in 1873 did a Thorablot, because February 2nd is the latest that Yule can occur. And that's when they did this Thorablot, which, if you celebrate Yule on the solstice incorrectly, they at least recognize when Yule was, at least in 1873. But Thorablot is a neo-pagan. It is not a historical day. Now, this is from Dr. Andreas Nordberg's book, and this is a Julian calendar. So on the Julian calendar, according to Dr. Nordberg and the runic calendar staffs, that Yule could occur between the 31st of December and the 29th of January, which then that would mean on our Gregorian calendar today, Yule can never be earlier than January 4th, nor can it be any later than February the 2nd. So that's just the way it is. And I decided to translate Dr. Nordberg because he writes in Swedish, but the English says the times of the Old Norse Yule and the great sacrifice at Lera, according to Thietmar of Merseburg, the dates above are given in the Julian calendar. In the Julian calendar of the 10th century, the full moon of the second Yule moon could occur on the 31st of December at the earliest, on the 29th of January at the latest. Thietmar stated that the sacrifice at Lara took place in the month of January, so it has to be at the same time of the full moon of the second Yule moon, which suggests that Yule and midwinter are the same feast. That may seem odd to word it that way to us, but you know, there's such this overwhelming neo-pagan belief that Yule is on the solstice that he's going through great lengths to prove that midwinter and Yule are the same thing. If you were to read the passage, it's very interesting. Now, today in Scandinavia, they call Christmas Yule, and the reason why is due to forced Christianization. So it's actually very Christian to celebrate Yule on the solstice. The first king of all Norway was Harald Fairhair, and his son Eric became king after his death. But his brother Hakon the Good went to England and became a Christian, and Hakon the Good returned after Eric had gone to be king in Norway, and he was upset that the whole country was heathen. He was the good Christian. So he basically, in the Saga of Hakon the Good, chapter 16, is he forced Christianity on the peoples, and he moved Yule from the full moon of Yule moon, which is Hokanot, which is the bloat night, midwinter night, and he moved it to be the same night that the Christians made the holy day. So King Haakon was a good Christian when he came to Norway, but as the whole country was heathen, doing many heathen bloats, and great many people had the favor of the common people, and they were to be conciliated, he resolved to practice his Christianity in private. He kept Sundays and Friday fasts, and some token of the greatest holy days, Christian days. But he did make a law that the festival of Yule should begin at the same time the Christian people held it, which was Christmas on the solstice, and that every man under penalty should brew a meal of malt into ale, and therewith keep Yule holy as long as it lasted. Before him, the first night of Yule was Hokanot, that has been winter night, and Yule was held for 3 nights. So today, the reason why Scandinavians call Christmas Yule is because this was a part of forced Christianization around the year 960 AD with Hakon the Good, and therefore, when Yule was moved from the lunar aspect of it to the solstice, the solar aspect of the Roman Church, we now had Yule being a title for Christmas, as it is today. And also, Yule was held for 3 nights. Remember, Tacitus states that Germanic day begins at sundown. So Yule was not 12 nights or 12 days. It was 3 days. So the 12 days of the Christ Mass are the 12 days between December 25th and January 6th, which is the Greek Orthodox Christmas or Christ Mass, which is also known as Epiphany. So the 12 days of Christmas is Christian in origin and has to do with the controversy over the dating of Christian Christmas. It has absolutely nothing to do with historical pre-Christian Yule. Christmas was chosen in 336 AD to be on December 25th by the Romans because at that point they were not the Orthodox Church, and they wanted to get Saturnalia and the Mithras cult, who did venerate the solstice on December 25th, into their wings. So I posted Thietmar Merseburg's quote again, so let's skip. Let's get to Yule and discuss it more. We know there was gift giving at Yule's symbol, but remember, every symbol has gift giving. So a lot of people say, gift giving comes from Scandinavian heathenry, but really, because like Hakon the Good, chapter 15 is discussing the Christianization of Yule. Hakon the Good, chapter 16 gives the details of a Yule bloat followed by a Yule symbol. And yeah, there are gift-giving in symbols, like Beowulf, verses 49 through 675. We have a long symbol in Beowulf. And there is gift-giving, but that doesn't mean that gift-giving comes from Scandinavia. We've been over that Yule was held in the full moon of the Yule moon for all the Germanic tribes, and all tribes is accurate. And it was 3 days and 3 nights. And at least according to Ynglinga Saga in Sweden, Yule was a bloat for crop planting season. And we know that there was a Yule Eve feast called Jolavezu, and we know that there were a Yule Eve for Yule Note. There was a Yule Eve celebration. Now that isn't where Christmas Eve comes from. the Christ Mass is a midnight Mass in Rome done by the Pope in the Vatican. So Christmas Eve is preparing for a Mass at midnight, 12 a.m. on December 25th, which is the 24th, into the 25th. That has nothing to do with Yule Note, which is like Yule Eve in Scandinavia. And we do know that there was a Yule boar from the Hervarar saga. So there were, oaths sworn on the bristles. And I want to keep this short, so I'm going to fly through this. The saga of St. Olav is one prominent example for a Yule gift called Jólabóði and Jólagjöf. Jólagjöf is a Yule gift. And I've already discussed some passages, but, the Poetic Edda and, in the lay of Helgi, the son of Jorvarth, says that Yule was also 3 nights. I want to fly through a lot of these passages, but even in Heimskringla, Magnus the Blind, chapter 6, we have a story where that they decide to postpone a duel. They would not fight during Yule because of its holiness. Yule was kept holy for only 3 days when no work was done. So they had their duel when Yule was over. So they did not like to fight on holy days either. There's lots of drinking with Yule. I could probably have listed about 60 different saga passages showing Yule bloat drinking here, but here's a list of 4. If you want to pause the video, look them up, or read them. The passage of Hervarar saga is another, if you want to pause the video and read, but they're laying their hands on the bristles, they make solemn oaths, and they do bloat the Yule boar, which is basically pouring the blood on holy trees and stone altars called herger. They actually eat the boar. They didn't waste animals in heathen sacrifice. The blood was what was shared with the gods, which is why it's called a bloat. They eat the food, they use the skins, they don't waste it, but they give the blood to the gods. Now, Sigurblot, the final holy day, is taken from Heimskringla Olaf Saga, Helga 77, and Ynglinga Saga, chapter 8. The first Olaf Saga, Helga 77, in Sweden there was an age-old custom, or Sidu, while they were still heathen, that there would be a bloat in Uppsala during Goa, which is a moon. Then they would bloat for peace and victory for their king. People from all over Sweden were to resort there. So this does match the Ynglinga Saga quote below, that Sigurblot is a word that means victory bloat, and like in Ynglinga Saga chapter 8, that Odin made laws that there were 3 major bloats a year on the first day of winter, midwinter, and the third bloat of the year would be on the first day of summer, which is called Summer Day, which is a victory bloat. Tomorrow is March 9th, which is Disting. It happens to be the full moon of Distingstungal, which I'll get to shortly. But Wikipedia and the Aesir community, known as TAC, have on their websites that this passage from Heimskringla Olaf Saga 77 has to do with Disting. Because it's a bloat for victory, it is absolutely, and plus it's in the moon of Goa, which before the modern Christianized Icelandic calendar was in the 4th moon of the year, which was more like April, and sometimes even very early in May. And because it states victory, a bloat for victory and peace, it's a clear indication that it's a victory, a Sigurblot, because, this is your last bloat before you go off and do your wars, if there are going to be wars. So you're going to bloat in hopes of victory. You bloat to the gods, hoping for their help in your battles. So this is not about Disting, unfortunately. I think what's going on is that people don't do their homework and they get the modern Christianized Icelandic calendar, which moved Yule moon to November and the beginning of December, and it ends before the solstice. It even ends before Christmas because it moved the moons around, and therefore they get these months mixed up, so they start guessing that it's Disting incorrectly. So Disting, I already read Heimskringla Olaf Saga Helga 77, and I've already read Ynglinga Saga, but this is important because it is on the 3rd full moon of the year after the first new moon after the solstice. It's when the Saxons did their Althing, and it is where the Swedes in particular, did their Disting, which is a shortened form of Disir, ancestral mothers, and Ting for thing, so it's like a mother's thing. And, you know, I keep quoting Dr. Andreas Norberg. He posted his book on academia.edu for free. Here's the link if you want to do it. While it is a Swedish book, there is a one-page introduction in English, which is what I quoted from here. And there is also a 20-page summary of the book in English. If you can't read Old Swedish, there is always Google Translate. Just paste one paragraph at a time. It may be tedious, but the book is an absolute must-read. And, you know, before I stated that the Saxons did their all things. So for Saxon heathens, here's a good passage, the Lebuini Antiqua, chapter 4, the life of Saint Lebuin. Lebuin in Old Saxon means love of wine. In olden times, the Saxons had no king. The Saxons did not have kings. But they appointed drotens over each gau, which is a village. And their sidu, or custom, was to hold a general meeting or an all-thing once a year in the center of Saxony near the river Weser at a place called Marklow. There all the leaders used to gather together, and they appointed 12 noblemen from each gau with as many free men as many serfs. So there were 3 classes in Saxon society. 12 from each class went. They outlawed kings, and all people were considered equal. There they confirmed their laws, they gave judgment on outstanding cases, and by common consent drew up plans for the coming year in which they could act either in peace or war. So basically, this is just before the bloats for victory, 1 moon before the bloats for victory, because they're going to decide who their Theoden is for the year, and which is their tribal leader for the wars only. And you know, the important thing is that when they gather together, while the Swedes and the Norwegians tend to do half circles, but the Saxon custom, they open their thing with prayers to the gods. They gather in a circle, um, and they give prayers to the gods, and they form decisions based on group consensus of all 3 classes in a circle. And they did have an Aeosean, a law speaker, or a law sayer. The last holy day, and then I'm wrapping up this video in the Swedish poem. You know, the Folkish people love this passage, but, you know, there are ancestral elements in historical heathenry anyways. But this Swedish poem, um, you know, lists a story of Alphabloat where no foreigners are allowed. A Norwegian Christian comes looking for hospitality by the laws of the land, and he is not allowed in because they already created sacred space with fire, and they didn't want to break that sacred space. Plus, you know, for family-only rituals and clan-only rituals, foreigners are not allowed. So Alphabloat is what it's called in Sweden, but the Old English had blot monode, and the Old Saxons had blood monode. And in that moon, the Anglo-Frisians and the Saxons in Saxony, they did slaughter animals to freeze meat for the winter and to get animal skins to keep them warm. So if you like the video, come visit us on Aldsidu.com, and of course visit my 80 or so blog articles at www.aldsidu.com/blog. Join us on the Facebook group Saxon Heathenry, and join us in the Association for Historical Heathenry. Of course, click like and subscribe, and thank you.